So I would like to direct our attention to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is not a place that I've ever been to in the world. I do think, however, I have some rights to be concerned about issues going on in this part of the world due to my work with the zoo, my interests in wildlife conservation, and the relationships that I have developed with gorillas. Now, these are gorillas that are living in a zoo, fair enough, but they are still gorillas, and they're of the same species of their wild counterparts that live in Central, East, and West Africa. There are conservation issues, which has led me to learning a lot about issues that are going on in some of the places where they live. And specifically, if we take ourselves to the DRC, there is a city there called Goma. And you may have heard of it recently. I may have been trending on X topics, but most likely not. I received some information through a newsletter, Africa as a Country. And I made some notes. It's talking about this major city in the eastern part of the country, which has been taken over by rebels called M23, which derives their name from a sort of political peace agreement signed on March 23rd, 2009, hence M23. And in a rebellion around 2012, M23 briefly captured Goma, leading to a ceasefire and peace talks, but restarted insurgency in 2017, and it seems as though it's been kind of going off and on, ever since then, and increasingly so currently. And there's talks that M23, this group of rebels, is significantly funded and propped up and supported by Rwanda itself. Rwanda is an interesting place, and in this sort of takeover of Goma, which may or may not just be straight up Rwanda military, then it's really not so much unlike the Russia-Ukraine conflict, except kind of in reverse. If Rwanda is taking over territory in the Congo, which is a much larger country, in this situation, Congo would be Russia and Rwanda would be Ukraine. So if you look at it from that perspective, it's not so much different than the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Yet you hear none of this. This is not in the news cycle. There are not United States, Canadian, and other European interests at stake in these conflicts. And fair enough, it is in a different part of the world. It is not in Europe, but we're all interconnected, and very much so when you take into account the rare minerals that come from this part of the world. Rare minerals, of course, not being very rare. All of these minerals, cobalt, coltan, lithium, and different things that we're using in all of our technologies, like our Apple and Google and Android smartphones and our laptops and computers and our electric cars, which are good for the environment, of course. All of these need these rare earth minerals. And some other analogies we can draw is Paul Kagame, which is a democratic leader, but is not so dissimilar to Putin in terms of being a dictator and sort of a forever ruler. Paul Kagame apparently wins 99% of the vote in their, quote, democratic elections. And I myself have fallen under this sort of marketing, which you could also call propaganda, that Rwanda is a safe and innovative and progressive country. Here is a great book, Road Trip Rwanda, which is written by a local author who lives here in Calgary, Will Ferguson. And as you go through this, there's the gorilla tourism, which is interesting, and we can get into gorillas a little bit later on. And of course, it talks about the genocide which occurred in Rwanda not too long ago. And I've always been like kind of impressed with how they made their country more peaceful and safe and secure after such a horrible thing happened. But if you dig a little bit deeper, a lot of this seems like it is just propaganda to sort of prop up the government and on an international stage make it look like a safe and secure and democratic country, a lot of which is arguable that they are not. But again, my interest in these stemmed from my learning about wildlife conservation. And specifically, if we think of mountain gorillas, which are one of 4 subspecies of gorillas that exist in the world. And this is something that I've been schooled in, which is community conservation. Lo and behold, you help local populations, then they can help the wildlife around them. And so, of course, when there is conflicts in the areas, and these conflicts are not too far from populations of mountain gorillas, there are 2 populations of mountain gorillas, one in the Virungas, which is the first group of mountain gorillas that good old Diane Fossey herself was researching and did a lot of work to establish protections of that population. And then later on, it was found that there were also mountain gorillas just a bit north, purely in Uganda, which is in Bwindi Forest. And those are the 2 populations of mountain gorillas. And here is an interesting and horrible statistic. The total habitat area for mountain gorillas is approximately 450 square kilometers. Now, when we think about their proximity to conflict zones, for instance, in the Virunga National Park, and in general, even if this conflict is not in that zone, if it displaces other people in the different areas, then when they're displaced, they're more likely to have conflicts with gorillas or go into their territory. Humans can spread diseases to gorillas, but then that also means that the humans in those areas need to eat, so that can cause deforestation and poaching for bushmeat. But here is an interesting thing. If conflicts just simply break out, if you think about the Vietnam War, and I think about a lot the horrible visions of napalm being dropped, totally burning forests with no consideration of biodiversity, and of course with the blatant intent of killing human life. I looked this up, and there is an estimated 20,000 square kilometers of forest and farmland and just general land that was burned by about 400,000 tons of napalm being dropped during the Vietnam War. And that whole area is about 44 times the size of the mountain gorilla's current habitat. So that's an example of a conflict, again, an American-centric one, but involved other parts of the world, indiscriminately killing human life and wildlife, biodiversity in general, humans included in that. So, of course, it goes to be said, my concerns for wildlife, African wildlife in these areas, well, extends to the human communities in these regions. And if they were allowed the peace and prosperity and security that we in the West, in the global North, in the developed part of the world, if they were allowed the same possibilities and potentials that we have and that we benefit from, even though we continuously complain about our lot in life and our situation, we forget how good we have it. If our peace and security could extend to all parts of the world, then everywhere else could care for their local wildlife and natural wonders and biodiversity that we all as human beings and our grandchildren have a right and deserve to have prosper, and that we can benefit from having access to. So why are these conflicts ongoing? I cannot help but think about all of these issues, as I mentioned, for rare earth minerals that are in such hot demand now and into the future. One of the reasons we have such peace and security is because of our technologies and the benefits that come from modern living that we have from all of our innovations. And these all require minerals that are extracted using cheap labor, arguably slave labor. And a great book is Cobalt Red, to read by Siddharth Kara. And these minerals come from places where they're extracted under the cheapest labor conditions, involving the most atrocious labor practices. In the DRC, people mine cobalt with their bare hands in conditions that we wouldn't wish upon our enemies, all to fuel this tech-driven prosperity that we have. You can do a little bit of a deep dive, and there's all these interconnected political and interesting global trade ramifications of the mineral trade going through Rwanda and their issues with the DRC, and that instability there is good for business in Rwanda. And there's all these issues. And I'm not trying to paint one country as the bad guy versus the other. When you're engaged in a conflict and both sides are killing each other, then you're both murderers. and whether or not there's bigger interests involved in China and the United States. I mean, it does make me think that us misdirecting our focus makes us so that we are blind to these issues and allowing these bad actors to exploit these situations for benefiting from mineral wealth and cheap labor. And by sowing chaos and deceit, people benefit from these issues going on in the world. And I think it's time to just wake up to this reality and to consider all of the human dynamics that go on in different parts of the world. And my hope with all of this is just to remember that the world is bigger than our own backyard, and we do have a say in voicing our concerns for economic and political and human rights issues in our own countries and in our neighboring countries. But it seems like we're a little bit biased when we only voice the concerns of our country and countries that are big in the media and we have a lot of focus on. It just feels like that bias misleads us to forget that there are other pressing things going on in the world that are arguably much more pressing. And it's also very cynical. I think there is still a lot of reason for hope that humanity within the West and in our relatively safe and developed countries can still be safe and prosperous. I think that we don't really need to be cynical about the way things are going. We can still find reasons for hope. So let's just spread our mindset. Whatever happened to diversity, right? We need more diversity of thought and more diversity in ideas that we are thinking about in places in the world that we are concerned for. So thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of your life. Goodbye.